Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eric Eichhoff, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Director for Alumni Operations here at John Carroll University. Thank you so much for joining us for our virtual scholarly luncheon as part of the Grauel Faculty Fellowship and the Alumni Continuing Education Series. We are excited to have you join us for this opportunity to connect with one of John Carroll's outstanding faculty members. Over the course of the last 2 years, the Office of Alumni Relations has worked to create innovative and interesting programming for our alumni, current students, parents, faculty, staff, and friends so that we can keep them engaged with the university. Today's scholarly luncheon is just one example of how John Carroll is sharing the expertise of its faculty, staff, and alumni with our broader community. Before I introduce our featured speaker, I want to go over a couple housekeeping items. Please feel free to use the chat feature to ask your questions, and I will curate them after Dr. Metras shares his poems and readings with us. I also encourage you to view the program in full screen so you can more fully enjoy the program. It is now my pleasure to introduce Philip Metras, PhD, our featured faculty member for today's virtual scholarly luncheon. Philip Metras is the author of 10 books, including Shrapnel Maps, 2020, The Sound of Listening, Poetry as Refuge and Resistance, 2018, Pictures at an Exhibition, 2016, and Sound Opera, 2015. His work has garnered the Guggenheim Fellowship, the Lannan Fellowship, 2 NEAs, 7 Ohio Arts Council grants, the Hunt Prize, the Adriana Rich Award, 3 Arab American Book Awards, the Lyric Poetry Prize, and the Cleveland Arts Prize. He is a professor of English and director of the Peace, Justice, and Human Rights program here at John Carroll University. In this session of the ACES Alumni Continuing Education Series, Dr. Metras will read poems and stories from 2 forthcoming projects. His 5th book of poems, Fugitive Refuge, a meditation on seeking love and belonging in an age of global climate change, conflict, and forced migration, and a nonfiction project called Where Hope and History Rhyme, about the long struggle for peace and justice in Northern Ireland. Dr. Metras, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. How are you doing today?
Thanks so much, Eric. I'm doing wonderfully. I feel very lucky to be here among you and to see so many familiar names and some familiar faces, and as well as some faces that I don't know, but I'm very grateful that are here. So yeah, I'm just very happy to be able to share some work today.
Well, we're glad that you're joining us, and you've always been a great supporter of our initiatives in the Office of Alumni Relations, so thank you so much. I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and then again, for anyone who has questions, please feel free to use the chat, and we'll get to those at the end.
Thanks again, Eric. So I just wanted to thank Eric, of course, as well as John Carroll University, and in particular the Grauel Fellowship Program, which enables faculty to take a semester to do a deep dive into their research and writing interests. And I am a supremely passionate teacher, but there's something about writing and giving and having the opportunity to write that feeds my soul in a very particular way. And having that opportunity in the fall of 2020 was a particular joy. So I hope that whatever you're about, whatever you're doing, that you have that opportunity to kind of feed your soul. There's a wonderful quote from a very old poet, Rumi, from about 1,200 years ago, which is translated as, when you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy. When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy. I think that really captures for me something that that writing does for me. And I hope that whatever that joy practices for you, that you feel that river moving in you as well. And I just wanted to say one more thing before I jump into this, which is just to thank, I mean, the specific people I know by name who are listening right now. I see Mike's face, and Christine, you're familiar to me, Richard, Terry, Laura, Lucy, Misty, Zia. Wow, that was a blast from the past. Wow, that's wonderful. So that just really touches me. So I'm going to share some different poems and maybe a story in between some of those poems. A very short story. I'll talk for maybe 25 minutes or so, and we'll have plenty of time to have some conversation as well. So during my Grau Fellowship, I was working on a couple different projects, maybe like 4 different projects, but one of them that drew a lot of my passion is called Fugitive Refuge. And it's a series of poems dealing with the questions of migration, human migration, particularly in our time of climate trouble, of wars, and of sort of this radical feeling that we have of our vulnerability as human beings. Um, Part of what was drawing me in this work is ancestor hunger. I don't know if you've heard of this term, but I love it because it describes precisely what I feel, this longing to have known my ancestors and to know their stories more intimately. So much is lost, of course, to time. But one of my ancestors in particular was named Skandar, which Alexander. He was Lebanese, and he fought for the Ottoman Empire. And but he fell afoul of the empire and had to flee Lebanon and fled to Mexico in 1907. My grandfather was very young at the time and witnessed his father about 12, let's see, that was 1923, about 15 years later, witnessed his father's murder at the hands of bandits during a very unstable time in Mexico, and they fled to the United States. And I think about the journey that he took and that his wife took, Helena, and I'm just absolutely touched by the sacrifices of those who came before us, I suppose. I mean, all of the struggles and the journeys that people have made. And I think that those personal stories, some of which I knew and heard from my grandfather, and some of which I've had to dive into to research through ancestry.com and the rest of it, and also just general research, has been a way of me trying to understand what it means to be human at this time and place, and what other people are going through right now that my ancestors would have gone through about a century ago. So that was a very powerful, kind of deep, animating rationale or force for me as I was writing. I'm just going to share a few different poems from that book, which ranges from very personal material to sort of kind of more of a global look and exploration. The first poem, I'm going to actually share my screen so you can see the poem as I read it. Sometimes it's a little bit easier for people. You don't need to see me close up anyway. I hope that the real joy is the work. So may I share my screen, Eric? Do I have capacity to do so?
You should.
Awesome. All right, let's give it a roll. Okay, now I just need to find the proper file. Where is it? Here we are. So the first poem of the book, Fugitive Refuge, I believe is going to be this one, which is called Plague Psalm 40. Like many of you, I experienced all manner of turmoil during the last couple of years. And one of the places that I went to seek a kind of solace, but also to seek a kind of play, was the Hebrew Psalms. And one of my practices in listening to them was to play with them, to sort of change them and to adapt them to our particular moment. And this poem is based on and is a remix, I suppose, of the Psalm 40, which I originally heard from a U2 song. So, you know, don't sleep on music as our source for culture. Plague Psalm 40. I wait in the waiting room of my room for you, dear doctor, to lean down and listen to the weird music in my chest. Draw me out of the mire of terminal detention, renewable distress. I'm surrounded, suffocated inside a gated state. The wind scribbles invitations, only tethered branches answer. Maestro, steady my starlings, for you I hunger. Lift your baton and stuff my mouth with singing. I don't usually read this, but I'm going to read it. It's a part of the first sequence of the book. I have this vivid memory of going to family reunions and weddings in which my my elders would all be dressed up very nicely and often drinking scotch and playing cards and things like that. And then the men would often be doing that sort of thing, but the women were making this food, and the food kind of was what has it was, you know, keeps calling me back to a sense of what homeland looks like and feels like. So this is called At the Arab American Wedding. At the Arab American wedding, great uncles and tuxes played gin, drank scotch, counted cash by the pool like extras from The Godfather. Inside, aunts had long given up the old country, or else wrapped it carefully inside wet grape leaves. The black, already canonical, fedoras and hair, olives and eyes, stories lilting like ash at the end of smokes. In ballroom haze, we danced Debke, clasped hands with cousins we knew or barely knew, arms braiding arms, feet stepping as if into dark, lifting and dragged back and forth, as if the foot were snagged on a fit of remembering. Facing each other, we faced each other and circled some invisible tree our dancing made, limbs reaching, no longer speaking the tongue we once held common. We grasp for branches to keep this circle moving, forth and back, stamping ourselves into a land so far from the land. One of the things that this book will feature are some artifacts from this journey of migration. This is the border crossing card of my grandfather, who's also Philip Metris, or here it says Felipe, since he was growing up in Mexico. His race is denoted as Syrian because there was no Lebanon at the time of the crossing, or he identified as Syrian, or they didn't say Lebanese or something. They lived in Salina Cruz, Oaxaca, Mexico. We can see here, and he was heading off to Lawrence, Massachusetts on October 1st, 1923. Thought a lot about that border crossing and how he would never speak of Laredo, Texas without spitting to the side because of something that happened there that he would never speak of. I guess I'll share just a couple poems from this family sequence and then just kind of build from there. This is called Bound. My great aunt Adele was a beautiful woman. She called me and everyone else she knew honey. She was a very stubborn and independent lady, which I just so admire. Once I came to visit her and just asked her some questions about her life, and she told me this set of memories that she had had about living in Mexico, and this painful experience that happened as they were taking the train to the border, in which her brother did something that was unforgivable that she's never forgotten. And I was thinking of the way in which that memory that she'd never forgotten is now one that I pass on, but also how all the people in the story are no longer alive. It's called Bound for Adele. 18, your hand promised you leave all your forbidden longings behind, a movie theater, to join your own graduation party, everything your father kept you from. You'd shimmied out the window, lay on the roof to watch classmates chat cheek to cheek in the town square. Now your father's gone in the ground. Now northbound train, a book of poems in your lap, everything you own hurtling toward El Norte, America, and marriage. If this were a movie, the camera would pan back from book to hand to train car after train car, endless track racing across endless land. Cut to Jimmy, your brother, his face blazes, breath huffing from the lug. These bags, why so heavy, he rages. He tears the book from your grasp, out the train's open window. Your mouth agape at him, flinging the bindings into sage and scrub. Your eyes, now darkened by cataracts, look past your grandnephew and living room, still stunned, look back and will not let go as he grabs another and another and another. They're all gone. This is the bridge they crossed, incidentally. I found a photographic image of the bridge between Mexico and the United States to Laredo, Texas. This poem is called Border Lines. There is a place near the place we belong. Sorry, I'll start over. Borderlines. There is a place near the place where we belong, where we don't belong and lose our way. This is where we need to find the bridge, follow it to its end of another beginning. This is from the point of view of my grandfather, who I think was wrecked by the death of his father, the murder of his father. I have a picture of him, which I'll show you in a moment, which shows his youth, which I never saw, of course, but his tenderness and his vulnerability. And I think that life did not allow him to be that person, and it scalded him. So this is sort of about imagining kind of how he began his life and maybe, what it was like to leave Mexico, to leave this place that he had thought of as home. The Arab crosses into Los Estados Unidos. Once I bathed in new phrases, spoke with the star throat, silked about in sentences, curled inside parentheses of dream. Once my father bent a dime between his index and his thumb, snapped a house from air, swallowed gold fire captured in singing glass. Glass sang from his circling touch. But when they came for him, the men, he danced to the orchestra of bullets. Did we wait to tuck him safely into earth, raise his name in stone? What we buried beneath our ribs. We hauled unhomed across oceans of dawn, here at the border of the country of the future. I own nevers, dusty keys with no receiver. I carry him and cross the river. One of the things I was trying to research during this Grauel fellowship was to find the grave site of my great-grandfather. Because of COVID, I wasn't able to travel down there, and I'm still hoping to do so at some point. But I spoke with some local folks down there, and I'm pretty sure that there's no remaining grave. But I think this poem helped me come to the conclusion that I didn't need a death certificate. I didn't need to know that his life was lived there, because I am the proof of his existence, and I know that that we always carry those who came before us within us. So, okay, there's my grandfather right there in the middle, and this is his family, including my grandmother. I should have showed you the picture. I went to visit her grave for the first time, but that's okay. Maybe I'll just read one more from this sequence. This is called Tweets to Iskandar from the Capital. I just imagined, what would I want to tell my great-grandfather about how things are now? If I could speak with him. And so I said, well, maybe I would be tweeting him. I don't know why I would be tweeting him, but I just had this thought that I would be writing these very short notes to him to tell him something about the future. Tweets to Iskandar from the Capital. 1. Great-grandfather, I wish you could see this land your children's children now wander. How from 3 directions you can't even perceive the palace of the emperor for the leaf-lush trees. It's always blown me away how the White House is sort of hard to see because there's a lot of trees and foliage around it. It looks it's not on a hill like you'd imagine, it's very much kind of embedded on this plain. 2, the dredged reflecting pool looks roughly like the flesh beneath my ruptured nail. The stone tower unleashes and roots down its double. If you could see my face, would you see your face hovering back like a skull? 3, this is the stone and water for the millions who died fighting a war called good. Your son warred a war before and after the war against everyone who didn't die. For my empire, should I object or volunteer? 4, this is about my dad. The war no one won almost drowned my father, your grandson, in its black stone. He carries the stone hidden in his spine and all the names he couldn't save. 5, when they came for you and brandished their guns in your store in Salina Cruz, you could not imagine El Norte any more than I imagine I hear you plead in 2 tongues to spare your children. 6, are you the secret reason my father's at home speaking any tongue of all the migrant people he welcomes as kin? He holds the umbilical passage to the homeland beneath his olive skin. 7, in the heart of empire, I swallow my sword and exhale a great fire, hollow out my words until they can float you over the stolen river. My heart and its borders swarm with migrant hope. I don't know why this is making me emotional, but sometimes it happens that way. I'll just share maybe 1 or 2 more poems from this book project. This book will be coming out in either 2023 or 2024, which seems like a terribly long time away, which makes me very sad, but it'll come before you know it. This epigraph, I love this epigraph from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. The whole world is a narrow bridge. The essential thing is not to be paralyzed by fear. Maybe I'll just read this poem. This is called A Map of Migration Routes. And this poem was inspired by a map that I'd seen, I think it was in Time magazine or Newsweek, in which the routes of refugees were kind of mapped out. And weirdly, they were sort of red and blue. The red lines were mapping out the sort of migration route away from a homeland, but the blue were mapping the routes back. So sometimes, obviously refugees want to return home if they can, if they're able to, because it's their home. And it just struck me that that coding was precisely what is the coding of our own circulatory system, right? Red and blue. And I suddenly thought of the whole world as a kind of body in which, we are these little cells, these little blood cells kind of moving through. And so that the poem is kind of working out that kind of metaphor of this collective body that we're all in. A map of migration routes. Each line is arrowed red. Inside, they tumble across muscled continents like erythrocytes, millions of flesh-tucked skulls hauling dreams. Red for departure, blue for return. Their lives shrunk to a single cell they palm to their chest in bus depots and windowless tents at night, seeking a signal, a recognizable voice, someone home, lithium ions draining. When given paper and crayons, their children draw weapons. Red for departure, blue for return. Like veins, the lines draw back to the heart where the rivers flooded, the fields baked in drought, where the guns came out, and guns made love to guns, making more guns, and the blood began to run. Okay. I'm going to do something I didn't intend to do, but sometimes you just do things and see what happens. I promised to read a couple poems that deal with my experience in Northern Ireland, and here's one of them. Belfast Standard Time. Of course, there's no standard time in Belfast, but one of the things I saw over and over again, I heard over and over again, is how the past was very much present for people. And they would use an elocution, which we don't usually use here unless you're from Pittsburgh or in Appalachia. You would use whenever the same way that you would use when. When I use whenever, I think of it as something you say when something is happening over and over. But they use whenever to substitute for when. And that's very strange if someone says, like, whenever my father died, because of course your father only can die once, right? And this poem kind of is about the trauma that people experience and the way in which the past is continually present for them. This is dedicated to Raymond Lennon, a dear friend and helpful coordinator of our Ireland Peace Building Program, where we take students every year to meet those who suffered through the troubles in Northern Ireland and have survived and moved on with their lives. Belfast Standard Time for Raymond Lennon. Whenever I was born in Belfast, whenever I grew up on the Shankill, the Falls, Newtonards Road, whenever there was a bomb threat, whenever the RUC barricaded the street in security, whenever I walked to school, I avoided the wall. Whenever I met a Catholic for the first time, I was already at university. Whenever we were burned out our house, whenever we burned our fingers lighting the Pope for King Billy, whenever we hurled a petrol bomb, whenever we remembered the psalm on Remembrance Day, whenever we neared the wall to lay a wreath, whenever we were spread-eagled and leaning against the wall, the rifle spreading us further, whenever I looked down to check the time on my wrists, whenever the bomb, I wished I could have told my father whenever he was alive how much whenever I was thrown 300 feet, whenever I was blown out of my shoes, whenever I heard a woman wailing, I thought, why don't you shut your bloody mouth? Whenever I don't forgive them, whenever I hear the likes of them are statesmen shaking the hands of the Queen, I think of my father. Whenever he met me, whenever I came home, he took my hand so hard, my whole body quaked. Whenever we came back from the funeral, my hand ached from shaking everyone else's hand. Wow, the time is flying, and I want to be mindful of your time and your attention, your beautiful attention. This is a poem that ends the book. It's called Devotional. It was inspired by an Islamic surah, but of course, our prayers of the three books are very much related. So if there's language that sounds like Hebrew Psalms, that's probably here as well. Devotional. Light my face and light the flesh of my flesh. Light each my eyes and light inside my sight. Light the light that makes me light in the bones, and in my hands light, and in my loins light, and light your light before and behind me, above and beneath me. Light to my right and light to left. Light to my enemies who in the moral dark will use my light against me. Light the dull swords of my ribs, the thick fist within. Light the blood-hot rooms pulsing there. Light the gates when they swing wide to the stranger. Light more light on my tongue. In the light, light, more light. In the black, light. And when it's time to snuff this wick, light that light. You've probably heard a little bit of noise in the background. I apologize. I didn't realize that that our wonderful yard lawn services out here at John Carroll would be working so assiduously. But that is the case. So I apologize. I hope that, was it more or less audible? There was a couple moments where, no big deal. Okay, good. All right, I'm gonna stop there and just like open it up. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate it.
Well, Phil, thank you so much for being with us today, and having heard your readings, I could just tell the emotion that went into some of those poems, especially as you're talking about your family and
Yeah.
and your ancestors. It gave me goosebumps as I heard you read them. So thank you for sharing that with all of us. Again, anyone who has questions, please feel free to use the chat feature. I had a couple of questions for you, Phil. First, I think we obviously know where you find some of your inspiration because you shared a little bit, but when you're sitting down and writing, whether your poems or stories, where do you find your inspiration to get those thoughts down from your mind down onto paper?
I love this question because on some level, I don't understand it in a way. It's like you have to get up and drink water and eat bread. Like I just feel like I have to sometimes say something. Like a voice starts appearing, some words constellate together in my brain, and I think this needs to be down on paper. I'll just give you an example, and part of it is like, how do we understand what it feels like to be alive, at every moment? So yesterday I had the unfortunate experience of having to run home, run home from the car service place because we only had this one car and it had to be brought in. And I was like 3 miles from home, so I thought, okay, I'm gonna run. Well, it was the day that was very misty. Was that yesterday? It was like this weird soup that we were running in. And so as I'm running, I'm thinking like, how do you describe this? It's such a weird feeling. And so I said, I feel like I'm dressed in the rain. So that was my first attempt. So I put, dressed in rain. And I said, it's not rain exactly, it's more mist. So I said, dressed in mist. I like that a little bit better. I was like, it's still a little bit abstract. So then I wrote dressed in the clothes of mist. And I was like, okay, this is getting a little bit closer. And then I was like, but it's not clothes because you can't see them. So I said dressed in the invisible clothes of mist. And I was like, I like that. But then I was thinking later on, no, it was way more uncomfortable than that. That sounds kind of too pretty. So I need another word in there. So I think I came up with dressed in the uncomfortable, invisible suit of mist, because I like suit better. Suit is more like what it feels like if you're wearing a wetsuit or something, like you're totally covered. So that's what I came up with. So in a way, I suppose I'm blessed or cursed with this little voice that says like, you have to put this on paper, you have to say something. Thank you for asking, Eric. And I just want to say, for those of you who are writers, I mean, you all have your own way of getting into the zone, getting to the flow. But I have an essay that I'm working on right now about what I call falling into the dream, like letting yourself kind of be captivated by your language and by your life. So, yeah.
So that's a great transition into kind of my other question. I know, Mike, you just sent a question in, so thank you for that. I'll get to that in a minute. My other question is, what advice do you have for those who are interested in poetry or interested in whether learning more about its history and famous authors, or getting more into the writing of their own poetry? What advice do you have for them?
Well, if you do podcasts, I can recommend 2 podcasts. One of which is done by a friend of mine who's an Irish poet named Padraig O'Tuama. And Padraig does one called Poetry Unbound, in which he reads one poem, then talks about the poem, and then reads it again. And his parsing out, his description or explanation of the poems is so beautiful. And he picks poems which are accessible but very contemporary, that you just, I don't know, it's like an absolute spell. They're about 12 minutes long, 12 to 15 minutes long, these little podcast episodes. So I highly recommend Poetry Unbound. I also highly recommend The Slowdown, which is a daily podcast, which is done by the now poet laureate. She was doing this beforehand, but it's also good. I would say also just like whatever feeds you, move toward the language and the poets and the poems that bring you delight and that you want to read. I don't think there should be any shoulds. I mean, one of the beautiful things about poetry, I think, is that, there's all different kinds. There's a poet and poems for everybody. So just find, what speaks to you, and find what makes you kind of feel more alive, and that river moving in you, as Rumi says. So
Thanks, Phil. That's awesome. And Misty agrees. She loves. I think you're referring to the slowdown. So and that's awesome. So I kind of love this question. It's, does it irritate you when the software flags a word as incorrect or even subs what it thinks is the right word?
Mike, as a writer, I could see how that could be a particularly irksome thing. So, what's more irritating or more scary is, like, I've had books that I've sent to the press, and an editor comes back with all of their very, very powerful lens of editorial advice, and they often try to make me regularize or sort of make more standard something that I've intentionally done differently, or as a sort of poetic gesture to derange the language or the syntax or something. And it kind of freaks me out, because my first impulse is, well, yeah, I mean, they're correct in a sort of abstract sense, but like, no, I really meant this, even if it's non-standard. And so one of the things that's so weird about being an English prof is that whenever you tell people you're an English professor, they always want to talk about some grammatical thing or a word usage thing. And for me, it's like the language is alive, it changes. I'm not obsessed with, there are certain things that irk me when I read them in student papers, but for the most part, the language is alive, and please, like, make it your own, as far as I'm concerned. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
Thanks. Hey, I want to say hello to Colleen also. I see you there. Shout out to you, Colleen. Yeah.
Why don't we go with Colleen's question, then we'll do
Okay.
one last one about the research you did, and then we'll call it a day. So Colleen asked, what draws you to different mediums? Short stories versus poetry.
One of the cool things, and I think Colleen may have been in this class, but one of the cool things, I have this opportunity to teach a course which is poetry, fiction, and nonfiction. And I've always thought of myself as a poet, since I was quite young, which is a weird thing to think. But one of the gifts of teaching that class is, at some point I realized, I should be writing fiction and nonfiction just to show students, like, that you can do this. And I believe that every genre offers us something in it that can help us explore reality in different ways. So once I started writing nonfiction about 10 to 15 years ago, creative nonfiction, and a little fiction, I realized that there was so much that I could share that I wasn't able to fit into poems, if that makes sense. This suddenly new, wider field was available to me. And it's just so beautiful. So I would try things like, if you have a story or something you want to try to figure out how to write about, try different genres. Try it like as an essay. Try it as a poem. What would it be like? What would it look like as a poem? Try it as fiction. Where does it go? Where would it move? So I what I try to tell my students is, don't decide you're a poet or a fiction writer or a nonfiction writer. That each of these genres are these, like, very durable and capacious and beautiful little opportunities to explore the world and your life in.
Thanks, Phil. And then finally, Christine, one of our colleagues, said, thank you for sharing your personal family stories. It's obvious that the effect they had on your writings. How did the research you did influence your writings?
One of the things that I try to tell my students and everyone who I can, talk about writing with, is that research to me is definitely a creative act, and it's a very important way of generating your material. I mean, if you're a novelist and you're writing about the 19th century, you just don't just write about the 19th century. You find out about what life is like then. And similarly, research has been a tool, a technology for me to sort of imagine better into the past. If I don't have the memories of those moments, I want to triangulate with what is known about what life would have been like in Salina Cruz, for example, in the turn of the century in Mexico. I want to do what I can to sort of transport myself there, and research is the way to do that. I think that one of the things, just like very specifically, that this project has helped me do is recognize that I'm the descendant of refugees, which I had never kind of said aloud. And how that changes my sense of my own politics, I think, is it's changed me, I think. And I think that also just writing about anything in my life always makes me feel a little bit more like that those things are real, and that they weren't just stories that were told to me, or that weren't things that, you know, I kind of had a memory of, but they've attained a kind of, you know, hopefully this sort of fiction of semi-permanence that literature has, right? That it's durable, that it lasts beyond my telling of it. I think every writer probably thinks a lot about, you know, why we do what we do. And I think one of the reasons I do it is because I'm in a battle against time. Time, the undefeated. You know, we're all on this planet for a very short time. Like, how do we deal with that fact? And I hope that maybe one or two things I've written, you know, at least my ancestors, you know, my descendants will carry, you know, like my kids, or maybe somebody else has been moved by something and they carry it with them because it means something to them and it lasts outside of my earthly existence. That's a hope for me. That's why I do what I do, I guess. And the research is definitely part of that, that toolkit, I suppose, of getting to those words and that language that is durable. Hopefully it's durable.
Well, I think it's clear that, you know, writing does provide that, you know, longer persistence of time. And, you know, after hearing, you know, what you've shared with us, I feel like the legacy that you're honoring the legacy of those who've come before you. So I appreciate your willingness to share that with us. And I know future generations will appreciate that as well. So thank you.
Thanks. And I hope it speaks to our wider sense of ourselves as, like, not just, you know, individuals, but as someone in a line of those who came before, and maybe some who will persist after us, you know, whether biologically related to us or you know, in spirit because of our impacts on them. So,
well, Phil, thank you again so much for just taking a few minutes out of your time to share your readings, your research, your passion with us. We are so incredibly fortunate to have you within our John Carroll community. I know our students and our alums who are on the program enjoy your learning from you, and I again thank you for your partnership with so many of our programs that we've done.
Thanks again, Eric. Yeah, it was a pleasure, and you know, I think it's a cool thing that, you know, you created this space to have people who are connected to the school, you know, have a chance to kind of re-engage with it. And yeah, that's one of the gifts, I think, of this. So I appreciate that. We used to do this thing, the Grauel presentations were often to faculty and staff, so it was a somewhat closed environment. And so this is, I don't know, it's more fun, you know, for me, I think, although being in person would be better. This is, you know, we can gather together in this weird Zoom land to connect. Yeah.
It's definitely a different experience for sure. I agree. I like the fact that we can connect with people who, regardless of where they live. So for that, I am grateful. And to speak about a few other opportunities that you all at home can join us with, I want to just give you a couple other updates. For those who live here in Cleveland, there are two really important conversations that the university is hosting, and Phil is involved with one of them. The first, entitled Religion After Roe, will feature 3 scholars from different religious traditions. They will discuss the recent Supreme Court decision related to Roe v. Wade and abortion. The program on Monday, September 19th is at 7 p.m. and hosted by the JCU Department of Theology and Religious Studies. The second program, Lessons of the Armenian Genocide, features Pulitzer Prize recipient Peter Balakian and is hosted by the JCU Peace, Justice, and Human Rights Program and the Armenian Cultural Garden. It will take place on Thursday, September 22nd at 7 p.m. Both programs will be hosted in the Donahue Auditorium in the Dolan Science Center here on John Carroll's campus. Additionally, we invite you to join us for our annual Homecoming and Family Weekend. Festivities begin on Thursday, September 22nd, as the Office of Alumni Relations hosts graduates of the last decade homecoming happy hour at High and Dry in Tremont. On Saturday, September 24th, all are welcome at the Homecoming and Family Weekend block party taking place before the football game. It will be hosted on the South Belvoir Boulevard in front of the Short Family Tennis Complex from 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. There'll be plenty of activities for everyone to enjoy, along with a cash bar and food trucks. And then that weekend concludes with Mass and brunch on the morning of Sunday, September 25th. Following homecoming, JCU hits the road for its first in a series of regional receptions. On Tuesday, September 27th, we'll be in Buffalo, New York. Wednesday, September 28th, we'll be in Rochester, New York, and we'll be returning on September 29th to Erie, Pennsylvania for a luncheon. And then later this fall, we'll be in Chicago, Pittsburgh, and Columbus. You can find out more information about all of these programs and register for them as well at jcu.edu/alumni. And additionally, we invite you to view our recordings of our previous programs on the John Carroll University Alumni Association YouTube channel. This program will eventually be on that as well. To view our extensive library, search John Carroll University Alumni on YouTube. And then finally, please consider a charitable gift to John Carroll in support of our students, our outstanding faculty like Dr. Metris, and our entire campus community. If you have already made a gift this year, thank you for your generosity. If you have not, please join me in supporting John Carroll so that we can continue to deliver an outstanding education for our current and future Blue Streaks. You can make a donation by visiting jcu.edu/give. Thank you again for joining us. Take care, be well, and onward on John Carroll.